Hello, my name is Christian Riley. I'm the Vice President of Technology Strategy here at Citrix, and I welcome you to today's session on how can IT enable resilience, continuity, and innovation. I'd like to start the session with what I think is a pretty bold statement. For many years, Citrix has worked very closely with global customers to really understand their strategies, not just during the pandemic, but of course, things were happening in industry well before the pandemic. Some significant changes that we'd seen in the way people work, how work was being defined, how work was being packaged, how work was being done, and who by. The challenge for talent was continuing to grow all around the world. And organizations that are really going to be successful in the future, we believe, are the ones that can deliver a unified, secure, and a simplified work experience to all their employees, contractors, and participants in their business across every work channel and across every location. Now, that sounds like a relatively easy thing to say, but of course, like all IT organizations in all companies around the world, we're continually dealing with more and more demand. If I actually think about what's happening in terms of that demand and what the impact is, I think there's some really, really profound observations that we have. So, from a market forces perspective, we see organizations all around the world post pandemic really trying to figure out exactly what it is that they will do going forward. They clamour to provide new products and services to their customers, to continually look at the impact of consumerization and how that simplifies what they'll need to deliver to their customers. More and more competition and more regulatory requirements driving significant changes in the way that those services and products get delivered. And of course, technology discontinuity. See more and more technology coming into the environment, into the workplace, and into the provision of products and services to customers faster than ever before. We continue to see the demands on IT rise, businesses pushing IT to deliver more continuity, to deliver better security, and ultimately working with HR to deliver a better, increased employee engagement philosophy. And that's really, really a significant set of things that perhaps we didn't see too much of before the pandemic, but we're certainly seeing much more of that in the post-pandemic world. And then, of course, we think about the employees themselves, the changing demographic, where those employees are, what they prefer to do in terms of how they work, where they want to work from, and what types of devices they want to use in the workplace, combined with a change in landscape of applications. So over the past decade, we've seen a continued shift and a migration to cloud. We've seen more and more adoption of software as a service, displacing traditional on-premises software that maybe was developed by the companies themselves. And then, of course, this scramble to modernize those applications so that they're more usable, more practical, and actually have a longer life within the organization itself. And all of these things really continue to pile pressure on what were already challenged IT departments. Perhaps the most interesting observation we have over the pandemic and coming out into the post-pandemic world is that hybrid work is here to stay. So I think the one thing that the pandemic allowed us to do, apart from all the bad things that it brought to the world, was the opportunity for us globally to perform what really was the world's first globally coordinated remote work experiment. And I think what we found in most organizations is that when allowed to, remote work actually works for both the employee and the organization itself. But thinking about the challenges and the changes to traditional IT, what it is that IT had to react to when all of the offices around the world suddenly become shut down, moving that entire workforce to a fully remote status, and then tying that to a change in applications where we're not just talking about applications that live behind the corporate firewall now. We're talking about applications that are mobile, applications that are delivered by web, applications that are SaaS. So we're seeing lots and lots of changes in those applications themselves. So when you tie a different way of working from a physical perspective to a different application set and all the pieces of infrastructure, device manageability, device provisioning, connectivity, security that we have in the middle of all that, of course, that gives us a significant increase in complexity. And with that complexity, of course, comes the risk from cyber attacks. Every time you pick up an industry newspaper or you read an industry article, it's led with more and more concern around cybersecurity. So I think cyber perils are certainly the number one concern that we've seen in most of our Citrix customers. And of course, when we look at that from an industry perspective, we see that same concern over and over again. So, what can IT do about this? How can you actually deal with resilience, continuity, and innovation at the same time, this great balancing act? Well, lots of the research that we did, both pre pandemic, during the pandemic, and have continued to do post pandemic, really leads us to these three key areas. And of course, there's a lot of detail inside of these, but we see this over and over again, irrespective of what the industry is, irrespective of the size of the customer, irrespective of the complexity of the organization. We see these three foundational things come up over and over again as key strategic focus areas that those organizations are looking to address. They're looking to continue to accelerate IT modernization that was happening before the pandemic. But what's happened during the pandemic, as the need to react to those changing circumstances and changing situations, has actually forced organizations to significantly accelerate what were multi-year digital transformation journeys, sometimes compressing those into just a matter of months. And of course, that brings challenges to the overburdened IT organizations that we've got. But fundamentally and foundationally modernizing IT and continuing to do that allows for the delivery of a new platform. The empowerment of secure distributed work is extremely important to meet the needs of the hybrid workforce. From an IT perspective, we must continue to think about how to provide the best end user experience. But in doing so, we have to continue to think about the security implication, the regulatory and compliance implication, and just the sheer weight of expectation that comes from 2 years of having worked in a certain way. Most companies are telling us that their employees prefer to continue that model, which, of course, from a temporary perspective, when it was implemented, was one thing, but then figuring out how to make sure that we have security, compliance, regulation, all in balance with a perfect experience for the end user. And at the top of the tree, we talk about boosting worker productivity. The one thing that we saw pre-pandemic and the one thing that we saw during the pandemic was the need to continue to keep the workforce productive. Now, of course, how you measure individual productivity in organizations will wildly differ depending on the nature of the role and the nature of the individual in the business, and in fact, the nature of the business itself. But think about what we've had to do historically in IT. We've had lots and lots of complex applications. We've trained people on all components and all screens of a specific application, but maybe in their work life, they only need to use 5, 10, 15, 20% of that application. So the important piece about that is making sure that we provide the right technology, the right application portfolio itself, and we also continue to simplify that so that we can remove all of the headwind and all of the roadblocks for each individual user. Let them be productive at the point of engagement by whichever device they want to use, from whichever network they want to use, whatever time of day, but really making sure that we can find a way to deliver exactly what it is that they need at the point of engagement to really drive up their individual productivity. So I mentioned hybrid work, and one thing I don't subscribe to, and again, I've had this conversation many, many times with big customers around the world. I don't subscribe to the fact that we'll have a new normal. I think because of the pace of change that we're seeing, and because of the need to continually adapt and be fluid to the changing environments that we have, I think we should talk about the new now, because now really is a point in time on a continued journey. And I think for many of us, it'll be far from normal. So underpinning some of the hybrid work conversations we've had are really these three key and pieces of information. And I think it's extremely important to remember these in the context of your individual organization. So through our research, we found that 85% of IT organizations will embrace cloud-first principles by 2025. And this includes organizations that were previously unable to do so because of tight regulation. We're seeing in all four corners of the globe that regulation now be bent more towards the need to adopt cloud. And we're really, really seeing the very last areas that were anti-cloud begin to embrace that. 74% of enterprises will phase out most of remote access virtual private network technology in favor of zero trust network access. It's simpler, it's more flexible. In many cases, it's more cost effective. And it really helps to drive that user experience that we talked about a little bit earlier. Getting technology out of the way and allowing people to to be productive with security built into the solution is really foundational to zero trust network access. And we're seeing lots of organizations take those steps. And 73% of workers want flexible work options to remain even when the pandemic subsides. The world of work that we knew in 2019 has changed forever. So when we think about that in the context of what it means from a technology perspective, what it means for the individual themselves, what it means to drive productivity, we really have to keep in mind that to keep and retain the talent that we have in our organizations, we have to listen to them and we have to flex our policies and our technologies to their needs and not the other way around. So I think it would be a fair question to ask, well, how are we going to do this? What is the magic source that we have? What are some things that we could look at that will help us to drive those three areas that I mentioned? Well, at Citrix, we believe it's really about digital workspaces. Now, digital workspaces, by their very definition, are delivered from the cloud. So in many cases, that makes them inherently flexible. It makes them inherently available, inherently reliable. And it actually takes away the management concern away from the organization and passes that to the vendor. So in the same way that we've done that in software as a service over the years, moving away from traditional applications in our data centers and co-location facilities into a SaaS delivery model, we're moving from a digital workspace perspective, the need for IT organizations to deliver their own technologies on premises to actually relying on vendors to deliver cloud-enabled, cloud-provided digital workspaces. And within those digital workspaces, we have lots of opportunity to deliver lots of different types of applications. Of course, we've always had at Citrix a very keen eye for virtualized applications, and that will continue. Lots and lots of our customers continue to virtualize applications. They continue to deliver web applications. They continue to move to SaaS applications as part of those accelerated IT modernization pieces that I talked to. And being able to deliver all of those different types of applications securely to the people, the devices, and the different locations on the left, irrespective of where those applications are deployed from in the examples on the right, and being able to bring security, flexibility, reliability, and usability to that digital workspace is what we believe at Citrix will be a differentiator for the more advanced organizations and those who apply digital workspaces to help drive the success. And we're actually already beginning to see some great examples through our research of the value that digital workspaces bring when delivered in the ways that I've talked about today. So 70% lower total cost of ownership for digital workspaces compared to individual point products. Over the years, IT has always delivered point solutions for security, for productivity, always building more and more on top of each other. And over time, that becomes extremely complex and extremely costly. We've seen an uptick in improved employee experience with organizations that have delivered Citrix Workspace, primarily because we're focusing on that productivity angle, bringing all of the different applications and services that they have into a single experience. And in doing so, we've actually increased application utilization. So not having to figure out exactly how an application works. How can I launch this application? Does it work on a different type of device? All of that is taken care of in the context of a digital workspace. So being able to provide those applications to the end users at the point of engagement actually helps to drive up the application utilization, which has a cost and a benefit angle in most organizations. And perhaps the most interesting one is around faster information retrieval and task execution. Again, being able to put that information at the point of engagement in the work front of the individual is really, really important from the point of view of individual productivity. We spend an awful lot of time searching for information just to act upon it. And at the heart of a digital workspace is the idea that the workspace learns how you work, learns your preferences, and will provide you smarter, more intelligent ways of engaging the more that you interact with the workspace itself. So lots going on in this space, and a fantastic time for us to be in IT and in the technology industry in general. The one thing I would take away from today's discussion more than anything is that the hybrid world of work is here to stay. There is no new normal. There is no new now. And we believe at Citrix fundamentally that digital workspaces are the key to driving employee engagement, driving additional value, and helping launch individual businesses through the pandemic into a very bright future in 2022 and beyond. Thank you.